The Czech government is saying it would be illegal for the European Union to impose compulsory quotas, forcing countries to accept a set number of refugees. At a meeting in Brussels on Tuesday, the proposed quotas could be adopted. Many Eastern European governments are opposed to the plan. The flow of refugees goes on. Scott Walker, once one of the favourites to be nominated as the Republican candidate for the 2016 US presidential election, is abandoning his campaign. He's governor of the state of Wisconsin. He's seen his poll ratings collapse dramatically after 2 lackluster TV performances. You are up to date on the headlines. It's time now for Hard Talk.
Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. The British government wants parliamentary authorization to bomb the jihadists of IS inside Syria. That same government adamantly does not want to offer refuge to any of the many tens of thousands of Syrian refugees now homeless and desperate inside Europe. Does David Cameron's position make sense? Well, my guest is ex-soldier and now influential Conservative MP Crispin Blunt. From Syria to Britain's future in Europe, foreign policy looks like a minefield for Mr. Cameron. Can he find a safe way through it?
Same question that's being put to us. Last time it was about depriving the Syrian regime of its chemical weapons, and the proposal that was put forward to Parliament, in my judgment, wasn't going to achieve the objective, and in the end the objective was achieved with the assistance of Russian pressure, getting Bashar al-Assad to deprive his own regime of chemical weapons. So that objective was achieved.
So your argument is a different target, different objective, but the same issues of legality and strategic coherence still apply. Because unlike in Iraq, where British aerial attacks are taking place alongside Americans and others, where the government has invited those forces in Syria, Bashar al-Assad has clearly not invited Western forces to attack.
That is precisely the point. But of course Parliament has yet to see the request that's going to be put forward. My committee has been taking evidence on the situation in Syria, and I think we're all, certainly I'm in the place where most expert commentators would be, and actually where international policy seems finally to be edging towards.
If I may just sort of, in a sense, shortcut what you're about to say, because it's quite simple. You have a track record, and I've been studying it, of saying that, you know, pinprick airstrikes against IS extended to Syria won't change the outcome. And you have made it quite clear that, in your view, just doing something because there's an outcry and something must be done is not an adequate strategy. Unless there's a much, much more coherent strategic vision, you appear to say, I can't support this.
Indeed, I don't think we should be drawing the United Kingdom into the legal morass that is Syria unless we have made that morass clear.
And Cameron hasn't, has he?
Not yet. And neither has, and this is, in the end, this is not a British issue. I don't think the United Kingdom is going to be, is key to this. Much more important to the actions of countries like Turkey, Iran and Saudi Arabia, and of course behind them countries such as Russia and obviously the United States. Now, the United Kingdom should have a role to play in a clear international coalition where there is an authorized international strategy underneath a United Nations Security Council resolution.
But to be clear, if I may, to be clear, you've just said to me, no, as of right now, Cameron hasn't outlined the kind of coherent, wider vision for what to do against the Daesh or Islamic State that would satisfy you to vote for military intervention in Syria. So the mathematics here is important. You are saying that if a vote was presented to Parliament today, you would still, as you did in 2013, different circumstances, but you would still vote against the Cameron government's wish to get authorization for action in Syria.
It depends, of course, on the terms with which the case is presented.
But the way that Cameron is operating today...
Right now, today, the answer to the question is yes.
You would vote against?
I would vote against.
And how many of your fellow Tories would still, as of today, vote against?
I don't know. Colleagues will want to examine the case that the government is going to make.
But you're chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Your ear is to the ground when it comes to your party and foreign affairs policy. You must have a feel whether the 30 who voted no to intervention in Syria in 2013 are still pretty much the same in number. Is that the way it feels to you?
I don't have the Whip's office operation to hand to actually know the minds of my colleagues and exactly where they are. My instinct would be is that there is a greater willingness to engage in a target that is explicitly the defeat of ISIL. And so that in that sense you would expect the numbers resisting military intervention would be lower. However, there is widespread concern about action in Syria that might engage the Russians, the Syrian regime, and I hope that my colleagues will be expecting the government to come forward with a military strategy that sits within a coherent international plan.
And you say that must involve a very proactive role for neighbours, particularly Sunni neighbours, which would include Saudi Arabia, maybe Egypt, certainly Turkey, working in coordination, you say, with Iran, which makes things very difficult from the get-go. But you also suggest that it might need boots on the ground. Now, Tony Blair believes that. General Sir David Richards, Lord Richards as he now is, who was the former head of the British Army, he believes that. Do you get any indication that the British government is even contemplating the possibility of putting men on the ground as part of this coherent, determined effort to destroy Islamic State once and for all?
I don't think there's any intention of having British ground forces mounting operations against ISIL to take and hold ISIL territory. The key issue here is the defeat of ISIL. What is the defeat of ISIL in Iraq and Syria? It is the taking and holding of the ground currently held by them.
Indeed, which involves ground troops.
And it then being administered by somebody. Now, in Iraq, that is straightforward. It will be the Iraqi army, Iraqi armed forces in some form that retake Iraqi territory and then administer that.
Or the Iranians.
Under the direction of the Iraqi government.
Or the Iranians.
Well, it will formally be the Iraqi government. What the relationships are the Iraqi government has with other governments is a matter, obviously,
okay, so that's
them.
Iraq. So in Syria, if you say that
Syria,
it's inconceivable that with British boots on the ground...
Well, in Syria, we have a 4- or 5-way civil war. And different international players have... in effect, different clients in this game. So Iran and Russia very clearly want to see the survival of the Assad regime in one form or another, because they see their interests as allied with the current Syrian government. We have made strenuous efforts to try and stand up the Free Syrian Army and Western-orientated forces in there, and that's come a complete cropper, as we've seen. There's been there is no hard power being exercised on the ground by parties to this civil war who are aligned to the West. And so the other parties who are fighting this, al-Nusra, which is al-Qaeda linked, although the coalition within which al-Nusra sits appears to have support from Turkey and Saudi Arabia. And then, of course, on the flank of it, you then have ISIL, which of course is the enemy of everybody.
Well, that's a good overview of where things might be on the ground, but let's be blunt. Lord Richards, former head of the British Army, says David Cameron has lacked the balls to go through with a coherent Syria policy. He goes back to 2012 when he says he presented Cameron with a plan which would have tackled Assad so much earlier on in this crisis and would have preempted and prevented the rise of the jihadist extremists in Daesh or Islamic State. He lacked the balls, Richard says, and the problem is that Cameron, even to this day, does not pursue strategy and statecraft. His approach, he says, is more about a Notting Hill, we know what that signifies, liberal agenda than it is about statecraft.
Well, we're in 2015, not 1915. The decisions the United Kingdom takes and the amount of capability the United Kingdom has to apply force in the region is very considerably limited by comparison to a bygone era.
But can Britain still not show a leadership in this issue?
Well, this is where my advice to the government is that Britain's diplomatic weight, which is, I think, relatively significantly greater than our hard military capability, that we should be trying to bang heads together of the nations who are critical to this, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the nations that sit behind them, the United States and Russia, to actually sit down and have a proper discussion about the plan to defeat ISIL. And that is going to mean that people are going to have to compromise.
You're suggesting that right now Putin, for example, couldn't give a hoot about what Cameron says because Cameron isn't packing a punch in the diplomatic arena?
In the end, Putin simply doesn't give a hoot about the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has a veto on the Security Council. So if we are to try and move towards a coherent strategy towards ISIL, and we need to remember that ISIL is probably a bigger problem for the Russians than it even is for the United Kingdom. There are many Russian citizens who are now fighting for ISIL, as there are some British citizens who've gone to fight for ISIL. There is a threat of ISIL-inspired violence on the streets of Russia as there are on the streets of the United Kingdom. So all the nations surrounding us have a common interest, and the issue is whether we are going to sit down and find an agreed strategy to defeat our common enemy, or whether we're going to continue to be engaged in frankly what I would see as second-order priorities in the region.
Yeah, well, the big diplomatic picture that you're talking about doesn't seem to be happening right now. So let's. Well,
I think it's beginning to happen.
Do you? Well,
and these
it may take time, and let's just talk about some other challenges that are much more real time. One, the British government would say, is that there are people inside Syria today who are not just intent on fighting with Daesh, IS on the ground in Syria, but are planning attacks on the UK from bases inside Syria. Do you support David Cameron's apparent happiness to undertake targeted assassinations on Syrian territory?
The Prime Minister's justification for that in the House of Commons was very tightly drawn, that there was an immediate threat to the United Kingdom.
He told you that, but he didn't give you the evidence, did he?
No, he didn't give us the evidence, which is why I personally think it's an appropriate matter for the Intelligence and Security Committee, who should be clear to see intelligence material, to see the basis on which that decision was taken.
Are you going to get that evidence?
Well, I'm not on that committee, but happily that committee is chaired by the former Attorney General, Dominic Grieve, so they're in an ideal position to have a look at whether the legal justification the Prime Minister presented is justified on the basis of the intelligence he saw. But that's the case he made, and I think I'm certainly not going to want to contradict him.
Well, I mean, prima facie, does it leave you feeling uneasy when what we know from officials is that the two Britons of the three who were killed were allegedly involved in a plot to undertake an attack around the VE Day commemorations in London, which had actually passed off peacefully weeks before the so-called targeted assassinations by drone happened on the ground in Syria? It seems a little odd to suggest there was an imminent threat when the threat they talked about clearly hadn't happened weeks before.
There is an ongoing threat from British citizens who've gone to Syria, are fighting for ISIL, are in communication with Britons back home and trying to egg them on here into taking action in the United Kingdom. These are all going to have to be matters.
More people arrived in Munich in one weekend than Britain will take over 5 years.
And if you continue to put in place incentives for people to do the wrong thing, which is to make this perilous journey